Hey, what's going on, everybody? I decided to go ahead and do a quick little stream here for today. I figured just in case, I won't use the Katyusha this time. I normally would, but I normally thought about doing it, but I decided, well. Anyways, let's do some videos about what's been going on. Let me see here what's on the stream videos list here before I do anything else here. Yeah, okay, that sounds pretty good. We're going to go ahead and see. We're going to look at what this Anglo said. This guy, Tom Nicholas, Tom Nicholas is going to say some stuff here. So let's see what he has to say. Let's get into that a little bit, and then we'll, that's probably the only one we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and take off the other two. But still, I think that it's good stuff, nonetheless, including this garage door installation. Let me see here. Let me just take care of this right quick. Boink. Coming up next. There we go. All right. There we go. Okay. We'll just stick with this one. We'll try to keep it somewhat short. So we'll just go ahead and do that. Okay. Let's go ahead and do this then. Let's go ahead and share the screenioli. So we'll go ahead and do... Oops. Back up. There we go. And... Boop, 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 boop. Share the screen. Boop. 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 And here we go. Let's go ahead and get into it. Let's see what this Anglo has to say.
Oh, hey everyone. You just found me here in the great outdoors, doing a bit of bird spotting. See, I'm a bit of an amateur conservationist, me, at the weekends, you know. There's a,
Oh boy, the Anglo is just dripping off this guy, isn't it? Ugh.
particular species I've got my eye out for today. Fascisticus potentialicus. You might be more familiar with their cousin of sorts, Fascisticus actualicus. Horrible creatures, those murderous things. They wreak havoc on any ecosystem they're able to establish a presence within. Relatively rare, though, thankfully, and easy to spot, too. You can usually tell Fascisticus actualicus by its call. It sounds a bit like a dog whistle. Thing about Fascisticus actualicus, though, far too rare to have any meaningful impact on its own.
Oh,
In fact,
Anglos.
in all known instances where Fascisticus actualicus has been able to see through on its horrible designs, they've always been supported by the local flock of Fascisticus potentialicus. Oh, the latter might seem far less keen initially. They're not all that likely to open their beaks in support of the things they'll end up doing. But as soon as Fascisticus actualicus has established a meaningful presence in the locality, well, you'll soon find Fascisticus potentialicus puffing up its chest and flying in whatever formation it is that Fascisticus actualicus decrees.
Mm-hmm.
The problem for conservationists such as myself, though, is they're just so damn hard to spot. Recognizing these floundering fowl is essential if we're ever going to encourage them to beat their wings in a different direction.
Oh boy. The authoritarian personality. Oh, I love it. Yeah. Oh, goodness. Yeah, it's this video. Yeah. Anglo. Yeah. How do these people see fascists everywhere? Yeah. Oh, boy. It is hilarious, though. It is absolutely hilarious with Anglos like this. I mean, come on, man.
In 1945, the Second World War came to a close with the victory of the Allied forces over Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. If they hadn't been already, the crimes of the former regime in Germany were now plain for all to see. 6 million Jews, along with Poles, LGBT people, and so-called political dissidents, had been systematically murdered. These genocidal plans had been drawn up by the state. Nevertheless, their enactment had required the complicity and active participation of a huge proportion of Germans and those living in the countries they came to occupy. Moreover, there was thus a growing interest in what had caused so many supposedly ordinary people to lend this heinous regime their support. Among those interested in finding answers to this question were 4 psychologists based at the University of California, Berkeley: Theodore W. Adorno, Elsa Frankel-Brunswick, Daniel J. Levinson, and R. Nevitz Sandford.
Adorno, really? Yeah, the guy who later joined, with the what's at school, the so-called cultural Marxists. Like I say, I think that they did good work talking about consumerism and how bad it is. I think so. There is value in that. I cannot think of it. The Frankfurt School. That's it. Yeah, but I think that there is value in that. But interesting. Go ahead.
2 of their number, Adorno and Frankel-Brunswick, were unavoidably existentially invested in this topic, both being European Jews who had fled to America to escape persecution. All, however, were interested in understanding how fascism had won over the German people in order that such a scenario might be avoided in the future. Crucially, these 4 academics...
You come from an intact family, you're basically fascist. Yeah. Yeah, they killed a lot more Russians and Chinese, but don't mention them. Yeah, no, they won't. They won't.
Whose research led to the publication of a book called The Authoritarian Personality, weren't overly interested in out-and-out fascists, those with a pre-existing commitment to the cause. Instead, they were interested in understanding what they called the potentially fascistic individual, the kind of person who might distance themselves from fascist beliefs.
Does this smell like pre-crime to you? This kind of smells like pre-crime Minority Report type of thing, but go ahead.
In any normal time, but who, should fascism take hold in the country in which they live and appear to have some level of popular support, might be persuaded to participate in its murderous designs. Eventually, as the title of their book suggests, they began to consider whether there might be a set of personality traits which make some people more susceptible to fascist propaganda than others. It's worth saying that Adorno et al. Weren't seeking to propose a purely psychological explanation for the Nazis' rise to power. They repeatedly stressed throughout their book that the emergence of fascism in mid-20th century Europe was the result of numerous economic, political, and social forces and circumstances. Furthermore, though the Nazis did win a huge share of the popular vote in Germany in 1932, for many, both in Germany and Europe more broadly, fascism was something that was forced upon them, rather than something which they brought about themselves. What the researchers behind the authority...
There's so many other things that I could talk about, but I'm not going to because I know that that would just muddy the waters. Let's continue.
Authoritarian personality were interested in exploring was instead what people's responses to a fascist regime might be should it come to power, and what it is that separates those likely to resist such a movement from those who might end up participating in it. It's important to begin by recognizing that fascism as an ideology is notoriously difficult to define. The novelist and critic Umberto Eco, who grew up in fascist Italy, notes that the various forms of fascism which existed in Europe in the mid-20th century varied wildly in their ideology.
You had to be careful about Umberto Eco. I read part of, I skimmed quite a bit, and then I read a little bit of his, what is it, 12 signs of fascism or something like that. He was very much an Ameriphile as well. He, when the Americans came and liberated Italy, he's like, oh my gosh, I saw these black folks with, playing jazz and stuff like that, or had comic books and all this sort of thing. So you have to be kind of careful about his bias. Once again, of course, he said, and of course, other elements that has to be talked about with Umberto Eco, once I read part of it, was that he also said in there is that, the communists did openly take advantage of the resistance movement against the fascist regime in Italy. But he said, but all these different, everyone had, different neckerchiefs and all this sort of thing. So once again, you had to kind of read between the lines on what Umberto Eco actually said. See, the thing is, I've heard about Umberto Eco a long time, but once I actually read it, I'm like, oh, he does say some things here and there where you're just like, They leave out certain little details and they just want to talk about what they think is important. So always go back to the source and read what folks always quote. Don't just rely on what they say, whether it's on YouTube or whether it's wherever. Read it for yourself and get your own ideas. I'm just telling you. Yeah, everything is fascist king. Yeah. Go ahead.
Content, and predicts that, should it re-emerge, its mottos and insignia would be different once again. He describes fascism as a fuzzy totalitarianism, a collage of different philosophical and political ideas, a beehive of contradictions. As Eco
whatever
goes
works.
on to articulate...
I can simplify that for you in 2 words. Actually, well, technically it's 2 words. Whatever works. Whatever works. Go ahead.
However, there are a handful of key traits that have been consistent across movements which have described themselves as fascist. These include nationalism, a cult of tradition.
Once again, would you say that Muammar Gaddafi, we were reading that yesterday, him talking about nationalism as well and talking about the tribe and talking about, individuals and talking about the kind of the hierarchy that goes along with that. So let's be careful about using that term nationalism, but go ahead.
And a view of social relations that holds that life is...
And also cult of tradition. There are plenty of folks who want to keep their traditions. You have to be very careful about these terms. Once again, you don't want to appear to be, a warmonger yourself or someone that wants to wipe out their culture, and you yourself will look fascist. Such as when people like Vosh say, I don't inherently care about Native American culture, or when Italians, raise their hands and whatnot, he doesn't care about those things. He just wants people all to, you just have to kind of bow down to what I think is correct, and that's not very good. But yeah, go ahead.
Permanent warfare between the powerful and the powerless.
And once again, with permanent warfare, you could point to people's protracted war with Maoism. And I know that, basically I know that I'm straw manning here, but it's like, once again, you're being very facetious when you say that, yeah. Soviet Union sold out their country for Pizza Hut. Italy sold out their country for comic books. Yeah, exactly. Stop apologizing for encountering. Yeah.
Less with the establishment of an equitable society.
Well, when you say the right, material conditions of each nation, yeah, not unlike socialism or liberalism, yeah. Yep, exactly. That is true.
Being a complete impossibility. Although, as we'll see, many of these aspects of fascism did eventually come to be of interest to the researchers behind the authoritarian personality, they were primarily focused on another consistent aspect of fascism, and its most pernicious: the popularization of racism, prejudice, and bigotry. For, as Eco writes, fascism grows up and seeks for consensus by exploiting and exacerbating the natural fear of difference. Fascism, to Eco, is racist by definition. Adorno et al.'s primary focus, then, was what it is that causes some people to be won over by this racist rhetoric, where others might be more resistant to it.
That's the most ironic statement I've ever seen. Anti-Semitism and ethnocentrism. I would say that one can lead to the other. I mean, the only, I'll just say this. I don't think this is a necessarily hot take, but I think the only real victory of the Second World War is just the creation of Israel. That's it. That was the only real victory. And of course, you had, the massive influx of European redacted who went to, mandatory Palestine as it was known in the Aliyah. I forget what what number aliyah that would be, but they came back and they helped to create the state of Israel. And a lot of them joined groups like Haganah, or groups like that were pre-established, or groups like Nakam to a much smaller degree. I mean, not Nakam, excuse me, Irgun, and other ones like that. But yeah, go ahead.
Rather than engage in mere philosophical speculation, Adorno, Frankel-Brunswick, Levinson, and Sanford decided to launch an empirical study into why people might be drawn to fascism. This study utilized two main methods. The first was the distribution of 2,099 anonymous questionnaires to primarily white, non-Jewish women and men living in the San Francisco Bay Area, with small...
Little bias, isn't it? That kind of screams bias, where you say white folks. Why didn't you go? And once again, you said this in San Francisco. Why didn't you mosey on a little bit further into Oakland? Oakland being a minority black city, because of course you probably because of course must segregation and everything else. But it's like little bias there. Go ahead.
Smaller groups being recruited in Los Angeles, Oregon, and Washington, D.C. These questionnaires featured two main types of question. The first were factual questions, which, in the researchers' own words, had to do mainly with past and present group memberships, church preference and attendance, political party, vocation, income, and so on. The second set of questions were opinion attitude scales, or
Yes, we've heard of Likert scales, yes. From like to dislike, 1 to 5, 1 to 10. Yeah, I've heard of Likert scales.
Likert scales, in which the participants
More
were
strongly
asked to
agree,
what extent they agreed or disagreed with a series of statements. These questionnaires were later followed by a series of interviews in which the researchers were able to get a better sense of why participants had agreed or disagreed with certain statements. Led by the particular focus of the racism of the Nazi regime, the researchers' initial focus was on anti-Semitism.
The thing is, all you have to do is ask about these folks that talk about racism, this and that. Ask them this simple question: do you speak Arabic? It's like, if you respect immigration, and they're fleeing, for example, Syrian refugees fleeing Assad's fascist regime or something like that, or folks from Honduras escaping the misery in their countries. Ask them a simple question: do you speak their language? Do you speak their language, number one? And do you understand their culture? And so they once again, there's always this sort of, well, we just you get into this whole sort of immigration, this huge love of immigration, this and that, and it's like, well, we don't want to understand these other cultures, though. Really, it's like, well, yeah, we want to accept these people in, and it's good for culture, this and that, but I'm still going to be a white liberal and say, well, I don't want to understand these cultures. I don't want to understand Islam, or I don't want to understand, these other languages, because that would be too much for me, So you have to put this into perspective. I doubt this Anglo has ever given any real study about what goes on in Pakistan, or whatever the case may be. He would rather just focus on fascism instead. But yeah, that's just me. Go ahead.
The statements the participants were invited to signal their level of
World War
agreement
II
or
as well.
disagreement with then were a series of anti-Semitic propositions. The more tame of these included, I can hardly imagine myself marrying a Jew, and most hotels should deny admittance to Jews as a general rule. Based upon the participants' responses, the researchers then placed...
So what did they specifically ask them? Or how did they ask it? We have to, once again, I'm going to have to, just kind of throw these out there more as like little peanuts at this guy's head. But it's like, well, how did they ask that question then? That's kind of curious. Go ahead.
Them along what they called an anti-Semitism scale, ranging from not anti-Semitic at all to very anti-Semitic. This one itself...
So when people ask about, okay, what... This was presumably done after 1948 about the creation of Israel. What would they say about the creation of Israel? I mean, imagine if you did this in the 1960s or 1970s and say, oh, okay, well, what do you think about Israel, this and that? Yeah, are you going to go on this end or are you going to be on that end? Yeah. Nowadays, it's a very tricky thing, isn't it? It's a very tricky thing. It's very slippery slope. Go ahead.
Stone obviously doesn't tell us anything more than that some people are anti-Semitic while others aren't. Alongside these statements, then, the researchers included a further set, which aimed to measure the participants' broader level of what they called
Pakistan is a socially right country and
As
lefties
they
use to
explain
fit their
it,
narratives. Yeah, that's true.
ethnocentrism refers to group relations generally. It has to do not only with numerous groups towards which the individual has hostile opinions and attitudes, but equally important, with groups towards which he is positively disposed. Where the previous set of statements had focused entirely on the participants thinking about Jewish people, this element of the questionnaire thus broadened the focus, inviting participants to agree or disagree with a series of statements about Black people and other quote-unquote minority groups. They also included some statements which sought to gauge how loyal or otherwise participants felt to their own in-group. One such example being, the main threat to basic American institutions during this century has come from the infiltration of foreign ideas, doctrines, and agitators. As with the anti-Semitism aspect of the questionnaire, based upon each participant's responses, the researchers then placed them along a scale, this time referred to as the ethnocentrism scale. What they found was that participants who scored highly on the anti-Semitism scale were likely to also score highly on the ethnocentrism scale.
I wonder if you had changed some of the the questions and changed the parameters. If you would ask Israelis today, where would they score on that in terms of ethnocentrism versus, I don't know, put in, anti-Muslim sentiments, I don't think you'd like the answer either, but yeah, go ahead.
And this might initially seem unremarkable. We might expect that someone who holds racist views towards one group is also likely to be racist towards other groups. The consequences of proving this empirically, however, are significant. As one of the researchers, Levinson, wrote, this seems to strongly suggest that we are faced here not with a particular set of political convictions and a particular set of opinions about a specific ethnic group, but with a way of thinking about groups and group relations generally. That anti-Semitism in particular goes hand in hand with a broader ethnocentrism, suggests that people are not won over by fascist bigotry due to them being simply convinced through facts and logic that the particular group...
So, you know what? I would ban facts and logic from being used in a YouTube video for at least 10 years. That would be my decree if I ran YouTube. You have to ban the words facts and logic. You can no longer use it because it has been overused and you have completely obliterated the meaning of that phrase. You can't use it. If I ran YouTube, that's what I would do. Go ahead.
Encouraged to support the persecution
of it, yeah.
Are inferior.
Are the Poles? That's fair.
That's fair. Susceptibility to fascist propaganda might be the result of something more deeply rooted in the way that they view the world, or, in short, their personality.
Oh boy, here we go.
The notion that someone's susceptibility to fascist and racist propaganda might be connected to something deeper about their personality was further supported by the next stage in Adorno et al.'s research, in which they sought to find out whether there might be a correlation or connection between the participants' position on the ethnocentrism scale and their opinions on politics and religion. The researchers invited the study's participants to agree or disagree with a further series of statements which sought to ascertain, in a very rough way, where the participants sat on a left-right political economic spectrum. Statements in this portion of the questionnaire included, in general, full economic security is harmful. Most men wouldn't work if they didn't need the money for eating and living.
There's some truth to that, but yeah, go ahead.
And It is a fundamental American tradition that the individual must remain free of government interference.
So hold on, that's libertarianism to me. That sounds more like a libertarian type of view. I think even left libertarians would agree to that to a point. So I don't see that necessary. Once again, this idea of conservatism versus liberal and progressive, that's very, very limiting. And you know, a lot of that stuff just falls through the cracks, doesn't it? Go ahead.
Free to make money and spend it as he likes. Analysing the responses, the researchers then placed the participants on what they referred to as a politico-economic conservatism scale. To my mind, this is where the results begin to get truly interesting.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to wake up. It's not that it's completely boring, but it is boring. Yeah, go ahead.
For while the researchers did find that those with progressive or liberal economic views were more likely to have disagreed with ethnocentric statements, amongst conservatives, things were more complex. As Levinson wrote, strong political liberalism is a pretty good indicator of anti-ethnocentrism, but political conservatism is less consistently related to ethnocentrism. In short, as we would hope, it was entirely possible for the participants to hold conservative political and economic positions without necessarily being ethnocentric or...
Yep. Once again, there are plenty of... This is what the whole thing is with conservatism. Conservatism in general, they don't really conserve anything. As has been said many times, I think that's normally a Wignat standpoint, but it is true, though. Also, you'll find that conservatives are the ones that will try to fight fascism harder and more realistically than any sort of anti-fascist leftist can. You know, anti-fascists are more worried about, you know, just trying to destroy the image of something. And they think, you know, I guess they watched Bruce Lee too much, where if they destroy the image, then they destroy the person. You know, this is the same thing with, you know, destroying the Catholic Church, as I talked about before, whatever the case may be. Whereas conservatives try a more direct approach, you know, and they try to, you know, blow people up and stuff, and that with people like Klaus von Stauffenberg. And of course, I mean, that, you know, is a whole different thing, but yeah, that's basically conservatism, you know, being the real, conservatism is the real anti-fascism in reality, because ultimately they want to control the narrative of what right wing really means. But that's a whole different story. Go ahead.
Racist. Where there was a distinction was in why someone held those conservative views. Take the statement, America may not be perfect, but the American way has brought us about as close as human beings can get to a perfect society.
I don't even believe. Okay, so this was 1967. Okay, so 1967. I wonder if this happened before or after the 6-Day War. That would be a good question, wouldn't it? You know, once again, you go to San Francisco. I presume it was a different sort of mix nowadays. You know, it's considered more of a liberal city, this and that. But I wonder how it was back when Adorno was doing this study, this and that, and how it would be if he went to Oakland, or if he went to Los Angeles County, more specifically, or if he went to Compton and, you know, asked these folks questions to get more of a widespread issue. There's a lot of bias, it seems, in this. You know, once again, I've done a little bit of market research just for a class, but the thing is, it's just like, you want to cast a pretty wide net. And of course, Mr. Adorno seems to have simplified his net to, you know, he must have, you know, just kept a fairly small net and said, okay, white women and white men. Okay. And then we're just going to, you know, bring in that catch and see what it brings us. And that was the, you know, that was, I cannot think of the word. Anyway, go ahead and continue.
Reasons why someone might agree with this statement. One person might do so because, after careful consideration of numerous economic, political, and social systems which have existed throughout history, they have decided that they believe that the contemporary American one is the best so far achieved. Another, however, being an American resident, might support that statement out of blind loyalty to their nation. What the researchers found in their later interviews was that those who had scored highly on the ethnocentrism scale were far more likely to have arrived at their conservative beliefs through the second way of thinking than the first. even more than the correlation between anti-Semitism and ethnocentrism, that the deciding factor here is not the political and economic views that one holds, but the manner in which one has arrived at those views begins to suggest that a person's susceptibility to fascist propaganda might be informed by their personality. This was further corroborated through comparing participants' placement on the ethnocentrism scale with their religious beliefs, in which the fact that a person was or wasn't religious turned out to be far less important than how and why they had become so. Those who had scored low on the ethnocentrism scale, for instance, were far more likely to have chosen the church they attended of their own accord, whilst those who scored highly on the ethnocentrism scale, if they were religious, were more likely to have simply joined the same church as their parents. It's worth highlighting that this doesn't suggest that everyone who goes to church and goes to the same church as their parents is a potential fascist. What it does allow us to do, however, is to begin to get inside the minds of those who have already expressed agreement with fascistic and racist sentiments. We are perhaps already beginning to see a set of shared personality traits emerge here. In relation to both politics and religion, we see that those who had agreed with fascistic statements being somewhat conformist and less critical in their approach to the world. Drawing upon these observations and others, Adorno, Frankel-Brunswick, Levinson, and Sanford thus set about painting a more complete picture of what the personality of the typical, potentially fascistic individual might look like.
Oh boy.
The researcher's method.
Boy, this is a grind, isn't it? Yeah, fascism is genetic. Yeah, exactly. People should never stop trying to make. Yeah, that is true, though. You know, Bill. Yeah, let's go ahead.
For uncovering what personality traits might be more
We're
prevalent
going to skip
among
ahead a little
those
bit
who
here
had
because, goddamn.
those within their in-group who have power over attitude in political leaders, believing that leader's toughness to be a reflection of their own, which, the researchers argued, is perhaps also projected, a consequence of the potential fascist's own repressed sexual desires. Together,
Ugh. Are you going to go all Freudian on people now? Or are you really going to go all Freudian and say it's sexual desires? Give me a break. Come on.
These 9 personality traits comprise what the researchers termed the authoritarian personality. It is important to recognize that these are all personality traits that one can have to a greater or lesser degree rather than either having or not having in a binary sense. It is also important to note that the researchers' focus was on potential. They did not seek to make the claim that everyone who displayed this authoritarian personality would inevitably support a fascist regime should it come to power. Nevertheless, they did argue that the possession of this collection of personality traits might make someone far more susceptible to being won over by fascist propaganda than others.
Oh, boy.
Although it might seem to be that way on first glance, the primary goal in outlining the authoritarian personality was not to create some kind of test to submit people to in order to accuse them of being likely to collaborate with a potential fascist regime. The goal was primarily to propose a new way of understanding how fascism might come to appeal to a certain portion of the population. Some of the specific suggestions that the researchers made about the personality structure of the potentially fascistic individual have come under some criticism. The broader point, however, that people might be won over by fascism less by the particularities of its arguments, but instead by the pre-conscious desires it seems to present answers to, are worth bearing in mind when it comes to thinking about how we respond to fascism as a threat. When we see or hear people echoing far-right talking points or racist ideas towards a particular ethnic group, our instinct is often to want to respond to the minutiae of their arguments, to try and prove them wrong with facts and logic. Whilst calling out falsities when we see them as important, however, the authoritarian personality suggests that this might not be enough. As Adorno et al. Argue in their conclusion to the book, if we should succeed in diverting hostility from one minority group, we'd be prevented from taking satisfaction by the knowledge that the hostility will now very probably be directed against some other group. As we have seen, the views that the potentially fascistic individual holds towards any particular group are not the sole product of them having come to believe in particular tropes associated with that group, but instead by a deeper psychological structure or worldview. To talk such individuals back from the fascistic precipice, then, has to involve a much deeper level conversation about how they see the world. Ultimately, the researchers felt that reducing susceptibility to fascism had to involve a broader societal effort. For our individual personalities are not separate from society, they are shaped by it. The researchers thus wrote that for the fascist potential to change or even be held in check, there must be an increase in people's capacity to see themselves and to be themselves. Whilst they regularly highlight throughout the
What does that mean? To allow more LGBTQ marches, or what does that mean? You know, go ahead.
Authoritarian personality, that those who held ethnocentric views were in the minority among participants in their study, with most people falling towards the center of all of their scales. Throughout the book, there is a sense that such personality traits might often be encouraged by our society. In order to truly quash the potential for fascism, then, their suggestion was that our focus cannot merely be on changing the hearts and minds of individuals, but in reforming society as a whole into one built not on hostility, but solidarity, and not on the pursuit of power, but its deconstruction. Thanks for watching this video. If you found...
Yeah, whatever. Okay. Yeah, tear down society and we'll make it, we'll be more, we'll be more involved with solidarity unless it gets involved with our views on things.
Right.
Okay, don't worry. I'm not going to make y'all watch this. I'm going to watch that on my own. Anyway, yeah. I hate Freud even more now. Yeah, exactly. Liberals will be used as fertilizer in the rice field, and fascists will be used as slaves to farm the rice. Oh, there you go. Okay. Why not just abolish society and become base and prim? Yeah. Yeah. Rice tube, baby. Yeah. Okay. Well, like I say, sorry to be so low energy this and that. I'm just still trying to wake up. I gotta get a mattress in here and everything else. But you know what? I just figure I'd let everyone kind of talk for a minute and everything. And we at least covered a video, so that's good. Like I said, I think we'll continue on from there. I think I will try to record, hopefully, when the first debate comes up. I'll go ahead and record some of my thoughts on that. I'll just record it on here, and then I'll just upload clips of it. So I'll do that. And of course, everyone, it's not going to be great commentary. You know, it's not going to be, whoever else, but I'll at least record that maybe. I know it's not for 10 days now, but yeah. But I'll see how it goes. Anyways, I think I've said my piece, so I'll go ahead and play us out here. Well, hold on. I'm sorry. Let me go ahead and make sure I give my props to everybody. Of course, Union Army Ball, Will DeMarco, No More Lips Plays 1975, Timogen, even Dennis Prager, as much as I don't agree with that. I think he was just trolling. That's okay. APR, Kyle's Jaw. I think that's it. Okay. That's it. So we'll go ahead and end it there. Yeah, man destroys, monkey creates. Yep, exactly. I am monkey, definitely. Okay. So we're gonna go ahead and play the new outro. Apology, the heck with it. We're just gonna do the new outro. Here we go. Y'all enjoy this outro, and y'all have a good rest of the day, and goodbye. Boing.